will be conducted here, and then the alternative will be in Tribeca. Here in this room, session number 1, issues currently shaping the transatlantic business environment, led by Dara Kelly, leader of US-Irish Business Group at Grant Thornton. That's going on here in just a minute. The alternative is in the Tribeca room, Venture Capital and Angel Network session, led by Jerry Moan, entrepreneur, business owner, business coach and investment acquisition. That's number 1. Right after that, we'll go straight into the second session. In here, it's the Irish Year of Design launch and panel discussion, led by Karen Hennessy, CEO of Design and Crafts Council of Ireland. The other choice, which will be in Tribeca, is Shark Tank, moderated by Mary McKenna, digital tech entrepreneur. After that, there'll be a quick 20-minute coffee break, and we'll go straight into the third session. Again, you have a choice. In here will be the future of digital media and entertainment, led by Maura Kelly, media executive and consultant, Purple Mountain Media, and IABN New York Advisory Board. Again, the alternative for the third session in Tribeca is The Habits of Highly Effective People, moderated by Jerry Duffy, he of 32 Marathons, 32 Days fame. After that third session, we'll reconvene here back in this room at 4:10 for the Mark Pollock story. And trust me, you won't want to be late and miss the start of that. So see you all at 4:10. Thanks.
All right, good evening, or afternoon rather. I hope it isn't Grant Thornton accountants that have cleared the room like that, but we're going to try and hang on to you for the next 30 or 40 minutes talking about issues that are going to affect the transatlantic business community. We'll talk about Ireland, how it is now, where we think it's going to go, I suppose key considerations for any businesses looking at transatlantic operations. So I'm going to start. We're going to break it up into 3 sections. We'll have a Q&A at the end, so please note down any questions you have and we'll get to them. Myself and Brendan Foster are going to talk about Ireland as a platform for international investment. I lead the US-Irish Business Group here in Grant Thornton, so my sole focus is talking to Irish businesses that want to break into the US market, and also US companies that have or are planning to have development strategies into Europe. So they need to pick a jurisdiction to come in through, and Ireland is really right up there in the front runners to date, and we can explain why we see that to continue. So just on Ireland's rankings, like it never amazes me every time I have to revise our rankings. We really are right up there when you look at US investment. So we are definitely one of the key jurisdictions of choice in Europe. It's really ourselves in the UK, and that would very much continue. If you look at the stats there, it's all about the knowledge economy. It's all about businesses that rely on monetizing intellectual property. It really is a key trend, and we'll get to why that is. There is a number of reasons, and tax will be the last one that we'll touch on. But there really is a collective rationale as to why tech and pharma and financial services choose Ireland as their jurisdiction of choice. So why Ireland? So pro-business, you've access to Europe straight away. Very open, very little red tape, pro-business environment from government through to regulatory through to our tax legislation. Young and educated workforce. I think we've got one of the average lowest population, and we also have one of the highest graduates per capita. So again, back to the knowledge economy. What do knowledge economy companies produce? They produce intellectual property. How do you do that? You need PhDs, you need tech developers, you need educated workforce, right? So there's no point picking a jurisdiction that will suit you for tax if you can't manufacture your product there in the first place. So English speaking, I kind of laugh at this one when I see it on all the different brochures, because it seems like such an obvious when you're coming from Ireland. But we are actually the only English-speaking, first-language English-speaking in the Eurozone. Obviously, UK aren't in the Eurozone. So I think our time difference as well. If you're a US company looking at Europe, you want to be able to do business in the same day. You will need to have a multilingual staff, because it's not about, you're not really selling into Ireland. You're HQing in Ireland, you're selling into Europe. So you're going to be selling into Germany, France, Spain. You're going to need people that can speak the local language. And with the way the EU is set up, there's no problem with population shifting across borders, so you will have access to that workforce that you will need. The last one is tax. Really, today we talk about three things to remember about tax. It's the headline rate, okay? It's the intellectual property regime, and it's the R&D credit, right? And again, the theme here is tech, knowledge economy. You're producing intellectual property. Hot sectors, it's a subsector of tech. Pharmaceutical is obviously huge, and we have the financial services as well. So the Irish firm recently commissioned a report on foreign direct investment. Obviously, my role is to concentrate on the US-Irish axis, but Brendan Foster is the head of consulting in Ireland, did an FDI report on Ireland looking at all different jurisdictions. So we thought it would be a really good, just an update as to, I've set the scene as to why Ireland works right now, and I'll drill into the tax a little bit later. But where do we see, Brendan, sustaining our advantage as an FDI jurisdiction? What did your report find?
Thanks, Dara. Well, I suppose everybody's busy from around the world from an IDA perspective, from the government selling Ireland and selling the positive messaging about why Ireland is attractive from an FDI perspective. So we decided to do a report, a qualitative research report, in conjunction with a research company called Amoric in Ireland, to test, is the message being heard, and what are our community in terms of CEOs in North America saying about our messaging and the concerns that they might have, and to convey those messages back to government to make sure we can sustain the success, which is a successful FDI, a large slice or disproportionate slice of the FDI funding into Ireland. So we interviewed about 47 CEOs, very top at the C-suite in North America, and asked them some key questions to explore the decisions why they would invest in FDI, why they continue to put money into FDI, and what are the issues of concern that would actually detract them from future investment, in order to make sure those issues are top of the agenda from a government perspective. So as I say, the research was conducted through April, just at the earlier part of the summer in the year, and the report has been published, and it's available on our website, and we'll make it available to the IBN after this at the conference. So we looked at within the report the whole global FDI, where we rank in terms of some of our competitive nations, and the UK, for instance, are a significant competitive nation as regards for the FDI funding. Clearly, some of the decisions that Dara alluded to, the people and talent, how do we rank, how do we score, what are people saying about the people and talent, have we got the right mix of people, have we got the right talent mix coming out of our university? And clearly some of the issues of concern are not only about the taxes is a big issue, and Peter will deal with the tax issue, but actually it's the more messaging that's coming out about tax is, can we actually sustain the tax rate, but we're happy with what's going on in tax. So clearly within our the key issues and key findings in the report, and are very detailed within the report, is that Ireland is seen as a very pro-business environment. The economic recovery and the message being put out by the Irish government around the economic recovery, and in particular, the fact that the Irish government and the Irish people have been resilient in the face of the disaster post-2008, it really resonates well with the investment community, that we are a story of success. We're getting up, we're pulling ourselves back out of the mess, and we're actually delivering, and we got out of the troika. But there are issues of concern. We conveyed these issues, and when we launched the report, we had Minister Richard Bruton in our office launching the report. Around people and talent, there are certain gaps. The university sector in Ireland are addressing those gaps in terms of some of the IT space, and even John alluded to earlier on, or Cathal, in terms of some of the people who in terms of animation and some of those new industries that are growing in Ireland, do have the right mix of people. Over the years, we tended to kind of educate a lot of accountants and financial people. Maybe we need to get that right. Tax rates is an issue, that actually people from a foreign executive perspective coming to Ireland are of concern. But from an IP perspective, we are seen as a very strong protector of IP. We invested heavily from a statutory and legislative perspective in defending our IP regime, and recently in the budget, the whole introduction of the patent box in terms of what's going on. We're very seen to be very competitive in that space. There are one or two issues of concern in Ireland as regards the introduction of standardised packaging for tobacco, which you may say is not an IP issue, is considered to be an IP issue as far as it could be an interference with intellectual property rights. But so one of the other issues that really touches people's nerve in Ireland from an investment perspective is we may be seen to have lost some of the competitive edge. There's a little bit of wage pressure coming into the economy as we've lost a lot of people to immigration, and we're importing people. and some of the issues around maintaining that cost effectiveness in terms of some of the statutory or the government interventions in terms of wage restraint. You can see some noise that maybe that's as recovery comes through, maybe people are looking for more wages. Obviously, infrastructure, we've invested heavily in the physical infrastructure and in terms of the motorway network, but we're actually putting a brake on some of the more capital intensive investment in the City of Dublin in terms of some of our transport infrastructure. We're only spending about 150 million in a city where on a par for the UK we maybe should be spending 700 or 800 million. So some of the projects have been put on hold. That's seen as a potential negative in terms of potential expansion. But also in some of the success in Dublin particularly is around the construction or the office sector in Ireland. It seems to be getting a little bit more expensive with very little coming down the pipeline. And of course, even in the rural perspective, I think broadband is really seen as the new motorway. We have to invest heavily in those infrastructures. But they're the issues of concern, and when you challenge those issues in terms of Minister Bruton and the IDA and Barry O'Leary, who at the time, in terms of launching of the report, they're alert and aware of these issues, and we're seen to be responsive and agile as a small nation. I think that's how we've been successful in the past, that we can actually turn the corner fairly quickly and be very responsive and address these issues and invest when investment is needed.
Yeah, I think the points that I've raised throughout the report are consistent no matter what size of business we have. Like Thornton as a firm, we're one of the 6 truly international accountancy firms, full service, audit, tax, advisory. And our clients vary from the small and medium-sized enterprises right up to multinational listed companies. We're actually the 5th biggest firm in the US and the 5th biggest firm in Ireland, which is kind of, bodes well. So I think it's having a consistent understanding of how businesses going either direction, especially coming into Ireland, can set themselves up right with the issues that are happening on the ground. But it's definitely an overall theme of continued sustainability for the FDI. The next slide, I'm not going to go into any of it, but the only point I'd make is none of this is tax rate. So all these things are other aspects of what makes Ireland a key jurisdiction for European expansion, and none of it relates to tax. And this is, again, when we speak to our clients, everyone wants to talk about the tax, but don't let the tax tail wag the dog. Like, there's got to be a business, a sound, sustainable business case for moving into any jurisdiction, and you've got to look at where the business wants to go next so that there's no barriers. So I think that's the key to take away from that slide, is none of it is tax. But to talk quickly about the tax, if I can get this all up, and there's only really 3 points. The way we set it up is we look at it in 3 different ways. So there's no getting away with it. Our headline corporation tax rate of 12.5% is the most competitive in Europe, and that's just a fact. When you go back to the theme of creating intellectual property in tech and pharma and the types of companies that are choosing Ireland, it's all around our IP regime, which is very sound from a legal standpoint, but also very efficient from writing off the cost of creation of the IP against your taxable profits going forward. And then you couple that with our research and development tax credit, which is essentially €25 in every €100 you spend on qualifying expenditure, which is a very wide definition. So you can see how it's so key. If I can get the staff, I know what product I want to design, I can establish and house my intellectual property in Ireland and then monetize it into the rest of Europe, because remember, we are selling into Europe, we're not selling into Ireland. So that's really the key. There is some other points there which I won't get into, but the summary points is it's very, very efficient from a tax perspective to move money in and out of your Irish structure, and there's very little leakage, if none, on your operations around the rest of Europe when you'll have a group structure. The R&D tax credit, again, it's actually this particular piece of Irish tax legislation was strengthened in our most recent budget. So really it is a key incentive for setup, because you will actually get a check from the Irish Revenue if you are pre-profit and you don't have any taxable profits to offset your credit against. So from a startup perspective, that's really key for cash flow and a great tool to have. Now, there's been so the overview, really, it's not just about IP. There's a lot of other business operations that are run. Like, we've seen a big trend of multinationals setting up their shared service centres in Ireland, which would take care of their operations throughout all of Europe. So again, you have to have the educated staff and you have to have the multilingual workforce, again, all educated. And that's really a common theme, and we actually have a specific service line that helps to support multinationals setting up a shared service, which is a real key trend, and they're getting a lot of value out of that. And now I'm going to pass over to Peter Vale to talk about the BEPS. And I think a buzzword that's been going around New York that I've spent the last week or two talking about is everyone's talking about the double Irish. What does it mean? It's gone off the table. There has been a change in Irish tax legislation that has removed the ability to create a double Irish after the end of December. There's a grandfather period running out till the end of 2020, so that gives us sufficient time to plan any unwind or any replacement structures. Overall, it's been received very, very positively. I think, and Peter's going to talk about the BEPS project now, but there is a move internationally to transparency, aligning your profits with your actual business and the substance of your business. And we think it's a really positive step that the Irish government have got out in front of this and not been reactive. So I'll let Peter talk a lot more about BEPS and how it could impact or will impact businesses going forward.
Cheers. Thanks, Dara. And just before I get stuck into BEPS, we're not going to talk, myself and Lincoln are going to cover it. We're not going to talk too long. Hopefully we'll get some Q&A at the end. But actually it struck me, our co-sponsors, Madison, did a very interesting survey a few years back. And they asked groups, why did you come to Ireland in the first place? And tax was number one on the list. But they asked them 5 years later, why are you still in Ireland? And tax was no longer number one on the list. I think that is relevant. The other factors that we've talked about earlier on today, availability of talent, what Brendan talked about, infrastructure, etc., they become far more critical. Access to EU markets once you're in Ireland for a number of years. Tax is still important, but it's not number one anymore. But what I'm going to talk about for a few minutes is BEPS with Lincoln. BEPS is about as interesting as it gets for tax guys, so we love this stuff. This is great. We're in heaven the last while. Despite that, I still realise that we maybe find it a bit more interesting than you do, and I did. I actually Googled tax jokes to try and come up with a few jokes for today. I know you think we shouldn't need that. And the jokes I saw were appalling, right? I'm not going to share anything with you. They were hopeless. And I did see, and it's not a joke, but I did see a quote from George Bernard Shaw in it, and it's sort of half relevant. It's not a joke, but it was, the government that robs Peter to pay Paul will have the support of Paul, which is an interesting line in the context of BEPS, because as a result of BEPS, and sorry, I should have asked, does anybody know what BEPS, has anybody heard of BEPS? I think people maybe have been able to avoid it. So it is the efforts of the OECD, as Dara says, to tackle global anti-avoidance. And as a result of this, because there's a perception out there that there's a lot of anti-avoidance being undertaken by multinationals, so we need to rewrite the rules is the general view. But it's interesting, well, when these are rewritten, who's the Paul equivalent? Who's actually going to gain from this extra revenue? And it's probably a lot of the big countries, certainly in Europe and maybe in the US as well. You wonder, well, who are they robbing from? Who's actually paying for all of this additional taxes that will be paid under BEPS? And you say, well, look, maybe is it countries? Are the countries that are paying lots of tax now that won't collect the same tax revenues after BEPS? And arguably not. Arguably the countries that are being attacked by this BEPS project, nobody's paying any tax there anyway. So, well, who is paying for it? Is it the companies that are paying? Maybe it's the investors in those companies that are really ultimately going to have to pay for all this extra tax? Possibly it is. Or possibly it'll be passed on to the consumers. So maybe it's consumers that will actually pay, which is sort of ironic because the whole BEPS project really originated from the public being incensed, maybe is the right word, at the tax practices of multinationals. And we saw it in the US with Apple and with the Senate hearings. We saw it in the UK with the Starbucks and Google. And people actually stopped buying coffee because of the tax practices of Starbucks. They were concerned about the tax structure of their coffee maker. Like, it's bizarre stuff, but that is the impact that it had. So it was all this public momentum, that the public perception that created the political momentum for BEPS. And that's why we're where we're at now. So it's got a lot of media attention. So I'm going to look at, myself and Lincoln are both going to look at BEPS. What does it mean? obviously in the Irish and US context, and we touch a little bit on, as Dara mentioned, the budget changes. And longer term, where do we see all of this? When the dust settles, what does it all mean for Ireland and for US-Ireland investment? Okay, so basically, BEPS is trying to move, it's trying to fundamentally shift the global tax goalposts. It's a huge mission. It started July 2013. What they've said is they will be wrapped up by the end of next year. So they're about halfway through. They've done a lot of work already, and the changes that are out there, they're radical. They're very radical. They are going to finish up by next year. Now, there will be a lot of follow-on work. If BEPS, if the OECD gets their way, and the OECD has the backing of the G20, how you actually calculate your taxes will be fundamentally different than it is now, and it has implications for lots of groups. And things that they're looking at are things like, say, if you have an Irish company and it's selling product, and you're living in Germany and you access a website in Germany and buy a product from Ireland, it gets shipped across to you in Germany. Heretofore, the Irish company wouldn't pay any taxes in Germany. It didn't have any people in Germany. But now what the OECD is saying, well, hold on, you bought this on a website in Germany. Maybe that website is a presence, a taxable presence for the Irish company in Germany. And that obviously has a huge implication. Some of the profits that were taxed in Ireland, 12.5%, are now being taxed over in Germany at a much higher rate. So clearly a lot of those proposals will have an impact on what taxes groups are paying. And there are lots of other proposals as well, which I'll touch on very briefly. There are 15. They've divided it up into small bite-sized pieces, so they're looking at things like intangibles. Obviously, a lot of planning by multinationals revolves around intangible assets. And the OECD, as Dara says, what the OECD don't want, they don't want to be able to artificially move risks and assets that they don't think are real into a jurisdiction with a very low tax rate. They want to see taxable profits aligned with substance. And obviously, what is substance is a very open question. It depends on what sector you're in. Broadly, that's what they want to see. So, from Ireland's perspective, what we need is some sort of a policy that is post-BEPS proof, but because BEPS is a little bit away from actually being a reality, we need something that until we get to that place, we've got a regime that fits the bill. So that's why, as Dara mentioned, we made changes in our finance bill recently to bring in this knowledge development box that we're bringing in and approved our own IP regime. So as long as you can plan to tax efficiently tax profits from IP, and as long as it's tax efficient to do that, we'll continue to offer that sort of a regime, an IP-based regime. But if the IP regimes effectively are knocked on the head by the OECD, which is broadly what they want to do, and they're looking to say, well, look, it really has to be where bums on seats, it's all about jobs. Well, then, what are groups going to look for? They're going to look for a jurisdiction that has a stable infrastructure, stable political environment, and a low tax rate, and that's where they put the jobs. And it won't really matter where the IP is. So Ireland is, if you like, is backing two horses, and we think we've got a regime that fits the bill under both of those scenarios. So BEPS, this is a good slide because it shows what this whole action plan is. 15 different action points under BEPS. What are they trying to achieve? Transparency. So what they really want is they don't want any secrecy. They want basically every tax jurisdiction to know what a group, where the profits are being allocated and who's taxing what. So they want complete transparency. They want coherence. So they don't want something that's deductible in one jurisdiction but not taxed in another. And that's a big feature of these hybrid instruments, which you may have heard of, and would be very relevant for US groups. Something maybe is treated as an interest deduction in one place, but it's a dividend somewhere else. So it's deductible, but it's not taxed up there. The OECD hate all that sort of stuff. So they want coherence and substance. They want taxable profits to be aligned with substance. And they're the three key things that the BEPS project is all about. So they're the different action points, some of which have already been looked at. So they're halfway through. They've issued an interim report. As I say, some fairly radical proposals. Not consensus in everything so far. I know there are some follow-ons from where they've got to already, but they have progressed this project much further than people anticipated that they would, and they have said, look, it's a drop-dead date. We are going to finish this by the end of next year. Yes, there will be some follow-on prior to implementation. You might say, well, how are they going to implement all of this? There's so much paper being produced under BEPS. And point 15 there is this multilateral instrument. When they come up with this new way of taxing groups, what they intend to do is come up with this multilateral instrument that will effectively bring into law all of the changes that have been agreed by everybody. So that is their end objective. The progress, everybody had started, nobody really thought this was going to progress the way it has at all, because there's been lots of projects over the years and they always just, they never actually came to fruition. This actually has hit their targets, which is amazing. And this is the work that they've done today. So they're about halfway through. As I say, consensus on some things, not consensus on others, that they've issued reports and said, look, not everybody agreed, but this is where we're at the moment. So there's a lot more work to do. How will it impact you? I mean, it's got an impact. I think for a lot of groups, BEPS is still a bit away, to be honest. So if you're already operating across borders, and this is only relevant to anybody who's operating across borders, are groups doing anything now because of where BEPS is at? I don't think so, to be honest. It's too far away. If you're looking at doing something new, you're aware of it. It's a factor in how you might decide to structure yourself tax-wise. So it's one of the influencers. But as I say, if you're already doing something, you're going to wait till this project gets a little bit further on and see when the dust settles, what does everybody actually agree on? I think from a US perspective, is that a fair comment that...
Yeah, I think in the U.S., we've got three things working against us. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world at 35%, plus at the federal level, and then state and local taxation. We also have a administration right now, the Obama administration, which is looking to curtail our concept of deferral on global earnings and erode the ability to defer and pay tax at a lower rate and not in the U.S. And now we have BEPS. Working with us and against us in certain cases. I think BEPS in the U.S. is going to directly affect all those structures where we have, hybrid instruments, as Peter alluded to, debt in the U.S. taking these big deductions. We see he's going to take a hard look at that, and we may see things that increase or limit deductibility here in the U.S. I think we're going to have obviously issues on the treaty. If you look at some of the things that came out in the first stage, we have pretty restrictive provisions in our treaties with the limitation on benefits clauses. I think you're going to see more restrictions in BEPS on treaties that don't touch the U.S. and that may impact some cross-border activity of U.S.-based multinationals outside the U.S., purely foreign-to-foreign stuff with respect to interest, dividends, rents, and royalties. I think on transfer pricing and the pricing of intangibles, this is what's going to probably hit the U.S. The hardest. Obviously, there's been a lot of IP migration planning over the years in the U.S. Obviously, this has created a tremendous amount of rate benefit outside the U.S., and so what it's going to happen is it's going to create higher rates of tax on these earnings pools sitting outside the U.S. that have never been subject to U.S. tax until they come back in the form of a dividend. So I think those direct impacts are going to be felt when BEPS evolves into, established law and principles. And I think there's going to be some indirect consequences too. Clearly we have a strong focus on financial statement presentation, both for the public investors in our public markets and the banking community in the private markets, which require audited financial statements for a loan and credit facilities. I think the effects on BEPS will indirectly impact financial statement presentation. You will have different disclosures perhaps, but more importantly, the numbers are going to change and they may not look as good as they have in the past. If you look at some of the public company data out there, the GEs, the Microsofts, the Googles, and you look at their effective tax rates, they're extremely low, and that's a result of our concepts of, deferral, APB 23, and not providing tax on foreign earnings until you really have to. And I think that's where BEPS is going to hit us in the public markets and the public disclosures.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, those groups you mentioned, their tax rate is very low because of the last bullet point there. In a lot of cases, it's the intangibles, and that's one of the things that probably got most public attention was the ability to move your IP around to a low-tax jurisdiction where you may not have any presence at all, but you can put all of your profits in that jurisdiction. And that's exactly the type of thing that the OECD are trying to outlaw. As I say, groups, are they particularly interested in BEPS at the moment? And if they are, what are they doing to prepare for it? I think it's more that if you're looking at something new, you'll consider BEPS, which you mightn't have done a couple of years back. I think for the moment, if you're already doing something across borders, you're going to wait a little bit longer and see what happens. Some changes that came in, Dara mentioned them in the Irish budget last week. We did get rid of the double Irish structure. The general view is that it was very well received in the US. There would have been a lot of people who would have been very concerned that what we were doing, that this is going to remove our competitive advantage. The reality is that it hasn't. Many of you know from a US perspective, there are lots of ways of structuring that don't actually involve your IP company being an Irish incorporated vehicle, but it can still be a resident in in a haven. You can just use pure haven, or you can use a Maltese. There are lots of other structures that give you the same answer and still involve an Irish company with real substance, but it doesn't, from an Irish perspective, we're not tainted with this Irish incorporated vehicle on top. So basically, it was a call between, if there was any disadvantage on one side, well, what are we going to, it is going to be a cost. Will we get any benefit out of that? And the benefit was that we will actually enhance our reputation by removing the double Irish. The fear was that the cost would be that there would be a perception that our tax advantages were removed. I think we've got the best of both worlds, because I think, yes, our reputation has been enhanced by doing what we did, by removing the double Irish, but actually people have realised we haven't really done a huge amount at all to make our tax regime less competitive. In fact, we made improvements to the R&D regime and to our innovation-based reliefs, such as the Knowledge Development Box and our existing intangible asset relief. So basically, where do you end up? You end up with an even better Irish answer. So what Ireland would love is that if you are going to move your intellectual property away from a haven, because havens may not have a life from an intellectual property standpoint into the future, well, why not bring your IP to a place like Ireland? Bring it onshore to Ireland. Yeah, you're going to be paying more tax, but longer term, everybody is going to be paying more tax. Multinationals are going to pay more tax. The question of where are you going to pay that? And obviously, we'd like if that was Ireland. So this Knowledge Development Box is part of that new armoury of options to onshore your IP. Other countries have similar regimes. We've added it to ours now as well. So we think, look, longer term, as I said earlier, groups are going to look at a place that has a low effective tax rate. And Ireland obviously ticks the box in that we have the lowest tax rate in the developed world. So if you assume that the IP planning longer term is completely gone, as I said, in terms of having a dual strategy, yes, we have a lovely IP regime that works at the moment, but longer term, when BEPS comes in and it is fully implemented, it's quite possible IP planning is out the window. It's all about substance, what's your headline rate? Well, we have that, as plenty of speakers have spoken about earlier. We've also got the availability of talent, the infrastructure, and all the other things. With that, I'm going to hand over to John.
Okay. So I know we all really enjoyed the piece before lunch on the film and animation, and it really is a huge success story coming out of Ireland. But John Gleeson, who's the head of the media team in Grant Thornton, Ireland, is just going to talk to some of the technical detail about the change in the refundable tax credit that is helping to drive that success story.
Thanks, Dara. I think we're a bit tight on time, actually, but we'll see what we can cover. So, as I referred to this morning, Ireland is moving into a new era of tax financing in our film and television industry. Ireland is, at this stage, a very well established and mature industry. A lot of the points have been covered. It is a very easy place to do business, English speaking, on the edge of Europe. We believe we're moving into a new era and a new phase of development across the industry. And that in itself is triggering some kind of pressure points, including the need for more studio space in Ireland, that we need to invest in our infrastructure, we need to invest in our talent, in our training, and in the overall expansion of our industry. Our industry is based on two sides of the same coin, essentially, in terms of how most industries are developed across the world. One is to attract US TV or feature film into a country to flood activity into a jurisdiction, and we've been very successful in doing that with very high-end television shows over the last 10 to 15 years. The other very important aspect is to then, on the back of that activity, to train and to nurture your talent and to build an indigenous industry on the back of that. So we're moving from the 1st of January 2015 to a streamlined repayable tax credit of 32% of your Irish expenditure. So that's 1/3 of the cost of producing in Ireland, so all of your bills for producing, for paying companies, for paying for expenditure and individuals for the production of film and TV in Ireland, 1/3 in the form of a cheque written by the Irish Revenue Commissioners as a notional tax refund, but in the form of actual hard cash. Our incentive has a very, very soft access in terms of a cultural test. Essentially, if you're active in Ireland, you're fully financed and organised in a business way, and are going to complete and deliver a feature film or a TV series, and you're carrying out that activity in Ireland, you will get the tax credit, as opposed to getting other top-up funding from the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland or indeed the Irish Film Board. The Film Board have a much smaller fund. They try to finance a couple of international type feature films every year. They will provide modest amounts of funding to the first season of a TV series, but they really want to focus on the smaller indigenous industry and getting projects that wouldn't otherwise be produced, made and financed. And that's the other side. That's the indigenous industry focus. So currently the rules are, we can apply 32% to the lower of 80% of the global budget, or the Irish expenditure, whichever is lower. And we currently have a cap of €50 million on per project. So this is a historic cap that's been in place, and the Minister for Finance in his budget speech a couple of weeks ago announced that a review of that cap will take place throughout 2015 with a view to removing that cap, which is an essential move if we're going to attract large blockbuster type studio movies into Ireland. We've introduced a new concept of, what is a production company, what is a producer company. And this is designed to attract, a degree of permanence to the companies that avail of the tax credit. So if you're a studio or if you're a financier and you want to come into Ireland at the moment, you must go through an ongoing producer company which has to have a sustaining trading activity. So it needs to have traded for 21 months and it needs to continue to trade 12 months after delivery of the project. So if you're a company, if you're a large, say, studio and you want to come into Ireland, but you just want to parachute in and out, you must use a local Irish producer. Unlike the UK, where as long as you're producing in the UK, you can just come in and access the tax credit directly yourself. But this is actually essentially a good idea, because what we're saying is, if you want to come in and access it directly yourself, well, then you have to come and you have to set up in Ireland and you have to have a substance to trade in your activities. Eligible expenditure definition is very wide, so essentially all of your activity, as long as it takes place within the Republic of Ireland on the production of the film, does tend to qualify. We've also opened up the qualification to non-EU individuals from next year, subject to a 20% withholding tax on talent. Most supplies on projects are actually being supplied outside of Ireland, so you can recoup the VAT charge on the project, but you don't have a VAT output. Actually, I've covered a lot of this. I suppose the big opportunity for Ireland at the moment is to look at that substance of trading and to try and attract US companies to set up in Ireland, with a view to looking at Ireland as a European headquarters for production, not just to produce in Ireland, but to use it to develop intellectual property for production across Europe, availing of 12.5%, availing of the IP regime, and availing of the 12.5%, and availing of the 32% tax credit.
I think it's a bit unfair to John because he really understands this so deep, but to get his presentation across in a small time slot. So I'd invite you to speak to John after the presentation so that he can cover off any questions you have. I don't think we've time for questions, but the key takeaway I want from you is that the Grant Thornton team is set up to deal with you with business operations on both sides of the Atlantic. We'll be around for the rest of the day and the evening, and please come up to us with any questions. Thanks very much.